is finally the year of our Lord 2025, and after our first empty year for the first time since, well, the last time we thought we were going back to Kalos, and Pokemon Legends ZA is finally on the horizon, bringing back the much beloved mechanic of Mega Evolution in the process. But what plans do Game Freak have for Mega Evolution in the future beyond this game? Will it stick around? Is this just a one-time deal? So good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and today, let's discuss Pokemon's Mega Evolution dilemma. I suppose we should start this discussion with Pokemon Legends ZA, which is hard given that we know basically nothing about it. Think of the Metroid fans, John. Think of the Metroid fans. Because before we turn to the future, I suppose the question we should begin with is, what can we expect out of Mega Evolution in this game? Will this game just have the original Kalos Mega Evolutions? Will they include the ones from Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire? Will they introduce the bare minimum amount of new ones, like ones for Kalos starters and Mega Charizard Z, because we all know that has to happen? Or will they introduce a whole new batch of Megas similar to before, like 20 to 30? Personally, I'm a bit stuck between the third and fourth options. I think we can definitely expect most, if not all, of the old Megas to return in this game, and there will certainly be some new ones as well. But my thought process is that if Game Freak doesn't want to make Megas a permanent mechanic, I don't believe we would see more than a handful of new ones. But on the other hand, you have to consider that Megas may be all the new forms that this game has to offer. With the game being set entirely within Lumio City, I think these will likely be the first titles in quite a while to not feature any new regional variants. And so it's logical to assume that there will be as many Megas as regional variants introduced in past titles. For Alola, 18 were introduced, in Galar we had 20, and in Legends Arceus, definitely the most comparable game to ZA, we had 16. And if you include new evolutions from that game, we actually got 22, which falls right into the amount of Megas that you would expect to get, averaging what we got between X and Y in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, 20 to 30. So assuming there are no regional variants present in this game, around 20 new Mega Evolutions seems reasonable. But then of course, there's my previous question that I brought up before. Would Game Freak really devote so much time to making new Megas that wouldn't stick around in Gen 10? And that seems to actually be the question of interest, more so than what we can actually expect to see in ZA. So I'm gonna break down some talking points and evidence. What points can we make for or against Mega Evolution sticking around after ZA? Alright, so point number one against, definitely the most basic one, is that there's always a new gimmick. In 4 straight generations, Game Freak has introduced a new battle gimmick. Megas, Z-moves, Dynamax, and now Terrestrialization. So there's no reason to believe that they wouldn't have a new 5th gimmick in Gen 10, right? Plus, I think with how much of a mess the competitive scene was in Gen 7 with the mix of Z-moves and Megas existing at the same time, the Game Freak wouldn't attempt to make another game with mixed mechanics. And that's also considering that of the 4 main gimmicks, Z-moves were probably the least influential. Another point against Megas continuing into Gen 10 is that Game Freak and the Pokemon Company have demonstrated time and again that they are willing to use Megas as a gimmick for one-off titles. See Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee or Pokemon Mystery Dungeon DX. I know the game wasn't developed by Game Freak, but it's still Pokemon. Even after they have been largely dropped from the core games, it's been shown that Megas are sometimes brought back just to have another brief moment in the sunlight. We should not assume that their presence in ZA automatically confirms them for Gen 10. But what if it did? Because I believe there are also several points in favor of Mega Evolution sticking around in the next generation. For starters, remember how I said that Game Freak always makes a new gimmick in the next generation? Well, realistically, how much longer can they afford to do that? Think about it. Try really hard right now. Think of a new gimmick on the fly or type this question in the chat GPT or something like all you kids do. What new gimmick could they possibly come up with now? They've already done new forms, manipulating moves, manipulating types, turning into giant kaiju monsters. I mean, realistically, what could they do that's brand new and exciting? They could have a gimmick that manipulates abilities or something, but that's not really exciting or marketable in any way. They could DMCA Pokemon Infinite Fusion and make a new game where Charizard is able to fuse with every Pokemon in the Dex, or at least every Gen 1 Pokemon more realistically. But, I don't know, the fusion idea has been tossed around for a long time, and I just don't know how well it would work in a real game. I feel like it would be far too complicated and realistically too much work for Game Freak to implement in a satisfying way. My point to all this is, can they even come up with a new gimmick? What if they've already said, you know what, we've done all we can do, let's just return to Megas because that was the one that people liked the most? I mean, they already established the lore in the Hoenn remakes that Megas can exist anywhere in the Pokemon world because of the multiverse, whereas, as far as we know, Z-moves and Dynamax are completely confined to their respective regions. Although, the Scarlet and Violet DLC did seem to hint at the idea that terrestrialization could be made an international phenomenon before long in the Pokemon world. Can we just stop to talk about that for a minute? I believe Game Freak intentionally planted this in the Scarlet and Violet DLC with Briar in her research to make terrestrialization international. To me, this felt like them leaving the door cracked for, okay, we tried, we couldn't come up with a new gimmick for Gen 10, so now there's a possibility of an old gimmick being the focal point of the next generation. I'm not saying that's 100% the case, I'm not saying the door is wide open, it's just cracked. The possibility exists that we may not get a new gimmick after this. The only issue is, I don't think terrestrialization would be that exciting in a new Pokemon game. And this is coming from a guy who loves it. My hot take is that terrestrialization is actually my favorite gimmick. But even I can say, who would really care if it stayed in Gen 10 other than competitive players? Like, I'm sorry, it's cool, I like how it's utilized in games, I like how it's shaked up the meta, but Terra doesn't have that hype factor behind it. Except in the TCG, those cards look beautiful. Take my money. Take my money! On the flip side, Mega Evolutions are not only extremely future-proof due to the simple fact that they can always just introduce new forms, but they are also extremely marketable. I mean, they still sell Mega Evolution plushies and merch to this day, 5+ years after Sword and Shield phased them out of the core games. They know the general fanbase loves Mega Evolution, and they continue to profit off of Mega Evolutions even without them being in the games. And this is why Megas still have an extremely strong presence in Pokemon Masters, the anime series, spin-off titles. The only area of the franchise where I believe they've been completely dead for some time is the manga. At least from what I could find online. Manga readers, have there been any Megas around since Gen 6 ended? I'm genuinely curious, please let me know. Because I'm a brain-rotten 26-year-old who no longer remembers how to read books. Another point in favor of Mega sticking around is that if ZA is like Legends Arceus, which I assume it will be because, you know, the title of the game, then would Game Freak really make new forms that couldn't be used in a competitive setting? Surely they know if any new Megas are introduced in ZA, people will want to use them to battle their friends, or see how they impact VGC. It's hard for me to believe that they would introduce a Mega Greninja or Mega Delphox in this game and then say, well, guess we'll never find out how they play competitively. That may sound like a silly point to some people, but like, Game Freak has very consciously been designing new Pokemon around VGC for at least 2 to 3 generations now. This probably means more to them than you think. I mean, we can clearly see this already in how they handled Hisuian forms and Hisuian evolutions in Scarlet and Violet. Although most of them aren't catchable in Paldea, all their families are, they can all be transferred in, and they're all legalized for competitive play. They were clearly very deliberate in saying it may not make sense that these Pokemon went extinct, but we still want them to see the light of day in a proper mainline title. If any new Megas are introduced in ZA, which I would certainly think that's the case, I believe Game Freak would want them to be usable in a competitive context in Gen 10. Also, it seems like everyone is conveniently glossing over the biggest point in favor of Mega sticking around in Gen 10, and that is, why did we get Legends ZA in the first place? Think about it, this game came out of left field. Everyone expected a Unova or Johto title. Those regions were due. It was Let's Go Johto, Legends Kyurem, Legends Celebi, Black 3 and White 3, Black and White Remake, but we got Kalos. Why? I don't think the reason behind it is as simple as them saying, well, golly gee, we haven't been to Kalos in a minute and Pokemon Z was never made, so we just really want to make it up to the fans of that region. No, absolutely not. Really, this is the first time that I believe that Pokemon has majorly deviated from their process. Yes, they skipped Z and went to Sun and Moon. That was weird. Yes, Let's Go came out of nowhere, but it was clearly made to capitalize on Pokemon Go and serve as a transition to the Switch. Legends Arceus was a new idea, but we were due for more Sinnoh content. This to me feels like the first time they have ever gone completely off the rails. Why would they skip proper Johto or Unova content, I know the Blueberry Academy was in Unova, but like that hardly meant anything, and just go straight to Kalos? And I think that's because this title is likely laying the groundwork for what we'll see in the future. Like I pointed out earlier, Game Freak very subtly left the door cracked in the Indigo Disc for there to not be a new gimmick moving forward. And now, a little over a year later, suddenly, Megas are coming back? Suspicious timing, I would say. It's also worth noting that Gen 10 is going to be a landmark generation. Obviously, it's the 10th generation, that alone is worth celebrating. But it's also highly likely to come out in 2026, Pokemon's 30th anniversary. And like how Sun and Moon as the 20th anniversary games kind of felt like a celebration of the franchise with various callbacks and Alolan forms for past Pokemon, even if they all were from Gen 1, I expect Gen 10 to be that on steroids. Hopefully not the Gen 1 part though. And what better way to celebrate the franchise's past would there be than to reintroduce one of the most beloved mechanics as the main gimmick, Mega Evolution. Mega Evolution in itself is a great way to celebrate Pokemon's past fan favorites. Why do you think Charizard and Mewtwo got 2 Megas? Sorry I keep hammering that point home, but it's still just funny to me that Charizard got 2. And hey, if you've been around this channel, you know I'm not biased. I'm a purist. I would rather there just not be a gimmick at all and the devs spend their time on another area of the game that I will actually appreciate. I don't love Mega Evolutions. In fact, going into this video before I started tying the strings of yarn together like a detective on the case, I was on the opposite side of this issue. I firmly believed that Megas would likely just be in ZA and probably not come back again until a proper Kalos remake. But the more I read into the signs, the more I think I've convinced myself that Megas will stick around in Gen 10. The competitive aspect, the fan service aspect, the lack of new ideas for a new gimmick aspect, the fact that we're randomly returning the Kalos of all regions aspect. In fact, if I'm wrong, I will eat an entire loaf of bread, so be sure to subscribe if you maybe want to see that in the future. I sure hope not, that's a lot of bread. But yeah, be sure to like this video if you enjoy, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you guys next time.